breaking news, the head of the Russian opposition, Alexei Navalny, or the de facto head of the Russian opposition, rather, has died in a Russian prison camp at age 47. So let's talk about what this is, but more importantly, we're going to talk about why now. So I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay. So first off, if you guys don't know, Alexei Navalny is we'll say the de facto leader of the Russian opposition faction. Now, you may note that there are opposition parties in the Russian government that do occasionally win elections in small municipalities or take minority seats in their state government. But the key is that these are tightly controlled opposition figures who oftentimes exhibit opposition that isn't meaningful in terms of real substantive policy changes. Oftentimes, they have disputes over issues that aren't really central to the agenda. They will act as a foil, or sometimes simply be an outlet to, I believe, help the Russian government identify potential anti-state actors. But Navalny was different. The thing is, he was never welcomed by the Russian government. He ran for mayor of Moscow in 2013 in a failed campaign that never really was able to shake off the oppressive bureaucratic roadblocks put up by Putin's regime. He was in and out of jail multiple times. He was also poisoned using nerve agents, right? Something that only really state governments like Russia have access to. And in fact, at one point around 2000, he fled to Germany following a poisoning, and Germany offered him asylum, and Navalny declined it. So he was sentenced around the time of the invasion of Ukraine, sentenced to a long stint in the Russian prison camps in Siberia. We can't call them gulags anymore, but they are Russian penal colonies in Siberia in which lots of forced labor occurs. But the official story is that he died after a walk at the Polar Wolf Arctic Penal Colony, where he was serving a 30-year sentence. Of course, the timing is, well, very appropriate because you know that the Russian elections are coming up just next month. And here's the thing with Russian elections, guys. They are not competitive elections, right? The outcome is a foregone conclusion. No meaningful post will change hands, right? The State Duma will likely have the same basic party makeup and party in power. Putin and all his inner circle will remain firmly entrenched. There may be some small level politicians that change hands, but you're going to see virtually no meaningful change to Russian policymaking. But what the elections are is a referendum on Putin, right? Because you can't vote for anyone but Putin meaningfully, or it won't matter. But what you can do is stay home. And the problem with an election is that it puts an idea into the minds of the Russian public, which is, why do we want Putin in charge? Should Putin be in charge? Just like now, right? In the US, we are asking tough questions about the person or people who are in charge of our current government. And that is how competitive elections work. You weigh the options of whether you want the current leadership or new leadership to take over. The problem is that for Putin, he has had a lot of problems. In case you haven't noticed, he sent 300,000 Russians to their deaths in Ukraine, right? For an unclear objective, right? He's never been able to articulate how exactly Ukraine or NATO or his boogeyman Nazis are at all a meaningful threat to the Russian state. And it's obvious to the average Russian that this is completely a war of choice. But the fact is that a city's worth of Russians have been killed in Putin's disastrous military adventure. So there are two things that Putin needs to ensure and lock into the mind of a public, the Russian public, that he deserves to be their leader. First, he needs to silence anyone who's going to have something to say about it, who's going to call him out on his corruption or his mismanagement. And Navalny continued to do that. He continued to write letters from prison, and those letters were published to social media. So he continued to be a voice of sanity in a Russian system that is increasingly feels like it is absolutely gone off the rails. So, but the other thing that Russia needs is proof that they're actually winning the war, right? Because if you want to frustrate someone, kill a huge swath of your population in a war you're going to lose anyway. And so when we look, this is why we're seeing Russia commit an absolutely eye-watering amount of troops into the area of Avdiivka. And you can see here that within Avdiivka, Ukrainian forces are conducting their withdrawal. It seems confirmed at this point. The question is, can they do it in time? But you see here over the last 4 or 5 days, Russian forces have begun to encroach on this town of Avdiivka, and they've paid an absolutely staggering price. Of all the armored vehicles in the entire Ukraine war, 10% of them, 1 in every 10, have already been destroyed just to take this town of Avdiivka. So Russia's pulling out all the stops, and the truth is, this town has been fought over for so long that by most aerial footage, it's a literal, it's destroyed. There's nothing left. It is a absolute moonscape. So why then does Putin need to fight over, sacrifice huge amounts of its combat power to take Avdiivka? On one hand, operationally, it would allow him to confront and destroy valuable Ukrainian forces, and that's true. And if they can encircle the Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka, they would achieve a pretty stunning victory, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Russia doesn't seem to be moving quickly enough to affect that withdrawal, but it's not as clear cut as it may seem. But more importantly, or most importantly, Putin needs to plant a flag to say he's done something, right? Remember, the Wagner Group achieved a victory in Bakhmut for the Russian government, but immediately after, the Wagner Group tried to stage a rebellion, meaning that Putin couldn't get credit for it, right? Because he had to erase Wagner from the memories of the Russian public, meaning he couldn't necessarily parade around claiming to have achieved some grand victory in Bakhmut. The closest thing he's come to a victory is only having marginal losses to the Ukrainians' counteroffensive. But in terms of real gains, there's nothing there, unless, of course, he can take the bombed out shell of Avdiivka. And that's basically his strategy. Guys, if you feel like a bombed out shell yourself, you need a secret weapon, and that can be Strike Gum. Strike Gum is the energy drink alternative. All right, when I was in Afghanistan, I used to carry around these big cans of these Rippets. They were so gross. They were energy drinks, military issue energy drinks. You can imagine what they tasted like. And drinking them in 135-degree weather, oh my God, it was awful, awful. But even now, you want civilian energy drinks. They're loaded with sugar. They're $4 a pop. So I came up with an alternative. Strike Gum. It fits in your pocket, 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece. That's as much as a Red Bull or an Amp Energy, 100 milligrams alpha GPC, no sugar. Check us out, strikegum.com, bunch of discounts. You should definitely get it. It's obvious because literally every 3 people that try Strike Gum, one of them reorders within a month. So the lesson is clear. People love Strike Gum. So that's all I had, guys. Thank you so much. A huge shout out to members of combatvetnews.com, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.